Okay, I think it's on, Jen. Do you see it? Because I don't see it.
Oh,
Yeah.
just started now. Thank you. Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Santos. I'm one of the co-chairs of CPIC. And on behalf of CPIC, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Brett Ullman. Formerly a teacher with the Toronto District School Board, Brett travels North America speaking to teens, young adults, and parents on topics such as sexuality, mental health, dating, and media. Tonight's presentation is entitled Parenting, Navigating Everything. I'll turn it over to you, Brett.
Thank you. It's funny, anyone who ever introduces me and it's the term everything, everyone kind of chuckles because the truth is the original name of this talk was Everything, and it's a little too much. I'm glad to be here tonight. I always say glad to be here. It's usually in person. This is kind of the new world we're living in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brett Ullman. I live in Ajax, so I'm on the other side of the city than you. My background is education. I spent 10 years teaching with the Toronto District Board, and then I left that, I think I'm 16 years ago now, to do this. And this is actually my full-time job. I travel, again, a little asterisk, pre-COVID, and speak on issues that I think we've often forgotten to talk about. I travel in churches, schools, camps, conferences. My big two talks would be the one I'm doing tonight, and also my talk on mental health. And then I also speak on the topics like media, pornography. I speak on sex. If you have a high school student, I guess it would be 2 years ago, and then 4 years ago, I came through the entire board and spoke on sex to students, which it's always an interesting conversation, but it was a good time doing all the schools. And I've done a lot of your elementary schools over the years as well. I'm going to share my screen, and I am new to Teams. I am a Zoom expert, but this is something my wife and I were working on today. So this is one of my newer talks. Oh, I do have one more talk on men. It's called Men Navigating Everything, looking at how we as fathers can, and husbands and boyfriends can be better men. So I'm going to walk through a presentation. It's about an hour. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I will say sometimes those questions are answered, so I probably won't go through them. If you have questions, we can do a few minutes of Q&A afterwards. You also can just send me private messages. You can find me off my website. And if you scroll to the top of the chat, I dropped in all my links, my website. I have a new book I'll talk about, and a few links with media as well. So I have one goal tonight, and it's to equip and empower you to be better parents from wherever you're at, looking at kind of moving forward. And I kind of hope that the common sense conversation is the strength of this talk. I am married with 2 kids. My wife's name is Dawn. She's a nurse. My 2 kids, Zoe, just finished a month a bit ago, her first year at Western. She actually went to Western after losing her prom and grad. We sent her. She had a chance to go to Res. She had a great year, tough year, but great year, and then finished her year by contracting COVID and being 10 days in an isolation hotel in London and losing her taste for a month. She's now fine. She's actually setting up at a camp in Huntsville called Minneowi for the summer. And my son, Ben, is, so Zoe's 19 and Ben is in grade 12. And I guess that's not true anymore. He graduated on Friday. He'll be heading to Queens next year. So my kids decided to go in 2 hours of either direction of me. How did I get to navigating everything? The truth is, my kids got older. I realized parenting is it's so much bigger than a meme or some kind of quick cliche. But it was one conversation with one man. I finished speaking a date on mental health, and after I finished, a father came up and he waited at my booth and he said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Sure." He said, "How do I talk to my daughter about sex?" It's a good question. And I went to answer and he interrupted me and he said, "Oh, wait, by the way, she's 16 and she hates me." And I kind of said, like, "What?" And he said, "Oh, forget about that. How do I talk to her about sex?" And I'm like, "Forget about sex. What do you mean that she hates you?" Because that's everything. Like, if we don't have a relationship with our kids, we will not be able to speak truth into their life. And so that's why this relationship is a really, really important one. And I realize that every talk that I do is topical, porn, media, mental health, these things, but I don't really have a foundational talk for parents. And I know there's a range of parents here tonight from all ages and stages. And so I began to do what I do when I research. I began to read, and I was overwhelmed. George Barna does research in the Christian community, and I acknowledge we are in a Catholic school environment today, and I assume most of us come from the Christian faith background, but I realize there will be people in this call who don't. But I think everyone will be able to take some things away from this, but there are 75,000 parenting books today. And it was a little, so basically I read about, I think it was about 100 over about a year and a bit, and created the foundation for this talk. So tonight, I encourage you to be a good learner. There are no cliches, no cookbook approaches, no poor theology from a faith perspective, but be a good learner. Take notes, take pictures. This will be on replay, so you might just want to sit back and enjoy, and then if you want to go through it again, you can find your light bulbs. And all that means is each of us have light bulbs, things that I will say and you'll be like, I can do that in my family or with the way my child is, and have opinions, which might sound weird, but I think I'd always rather someone have a different opinion than me than have no opinion at all. I mean, the Bible talks about iron sharpening iron, and it takes iron to do that, right? We kind of hold like this, the thoughts and things we have on parenting, and see if we can get better. And the last one just says YouTube, which sounds weird. I have around 200 videos on my YouTube channel. For a year and a half to 2 years, every question a parent would ask me after or during a talk, I made into a YouTube video. So if it just says YouTube, it means I have a whole video on that for you where you can go and find it later. I just acknowledge too that not everyone, stock family syndrome is something we kind of have. This is what it means. It's the perfect family myth. And there's a quote someone said that perfect pictures paralyze parents. I don't like the alliteration, but it's the reality. Are there people in nuclear family here? Yes. But look at these photos. Like, look at the people in the top left. They're all smiling, facing the camera. Like, that's not real life. Top right, they're all holding hands, walking into the forest. The ladies are wearing hats. Like, might be you, probably not. So yes, I acknowledge nuclear family. There is a lot of single moms, less single dads. That's another conversation for another day. Grandparents raising children in Canada is now statistically significant. We're looking at 1 to 3% of all children in this country are now being raised by their grandparents. We look at adoption and foster parenting, blended families, extended families, and then spiritual parents. The list goes on. And so I just acknowledge there's a whole bunch of different people today. Someone has their mic on. If you just want to check, just so that the noise isn't coming through, that'd be a big help. So this is the world your kids are growing up in today. And this is grade 1 through grade 12. And on the top is my family. This is when my kids experienced things. I mean, technology, when my daughter Zoe was in kindergarten, the iPhone came out. Her best friend's parents got divorced in grade 1. That was a tough conversation to try to explain to her. One of my daughter's friends' older sisters struggled with self-harm. And in grade 2, they were all talking about it on a trampoline. My son saw his first pornographic image in grade 3, which is around Canadian average. In grade 4, my daughter started coming home from school asking for a song, like, can I have this band or that band? Dating began for my daughter's friends in the beginning of grade 5. Social media became normal at the end of that. Drugs were found in my kids' school every year from grade 6 through now. And then on the bottom, the first up to grade 6 are my best friend's children. Bullying in grade 1, so they won't go to school. If you don't know me, I actually have been on an 8-year journey. I did a master's degree in Chicago and had a breakdown after, and spent a year of my life at home. Anxiety, panic, depression have been part of my life ever since to this day. I was actually diagnosed with Lyme disease 3 years ago as well. They don't know if that's a root issue or if I'm just, as my doctor said, really unlucky. But I'm 50. I turned 50 like 3 days ago. But like, as a 50-year-old, I know I struggle. And then I look at a student, a 15-year-old, and my heart goes out to them. How about a grade 2? How do you process that? Eating disorders in grade 3, depression grade 4. I've had multiple suicides in grade 5 at different boards across this province, sexting in grade 6. Then we hit middle school. And that statement should concern us. Like, then we hit middle school, grade 7, 8, peer pressure, self-esteem issues, alcohol use, phone addiction, and peer attachment. Then we hit high school, alcohol and drug abuse. Now, the depressed girl and the adrift boy, these are generalizations. I do admit that. This would come from the author Leonard Sachs. But I do see that. Busyness becomes the bane of our existence, the desperation for pure acceptance, and extreme stress. Like, are you prepared? Am I prepared? How are we preparing our kids for the world that they're living in today? And this is why that idea of that foundational relationship is so important. So for most of my career, and still to this day, I speak topically on all kinds of things. But today we're going to look at this conversation of how do we parent better. And when I began reading books, I found that there were 4 things that I'm going to call the foundations of parenting. Now, I have a book on parenting. It's not called The 4 Pillars of Parenting. You can move these around, you can change them. I just thought they were really important. And if you come like me from the Christian faith community, we often over spiritualize parenting, meaning when you hear a parenting talk, it's only about how do we bring faith right from the church back into our kids kind of at home, from school into our kids at home. But I think these things are really, really important. And of course, I put at the bottom, true Christian faith touches all aspects of life. Now, I had to switch this from Keynote, which is Mac, to PowerPoint, so I apologize if there's a few font issues as we go through this. So here's a big question. What is parenting? There's an author, Michael Levine, who once said, having children makes you no more a parent than having a piano makes you a pianist. It's kind of a dumb joke. I do get it, but it's very true. So I began to post onto my social media community questions. So I posted, what is the goal of parenting? And a person wrote me within minutes, and they said the goal of Christian parenting is to raise godly children. And I kind of go, yes, but there's so much spiritual language in that. I mean, how many kids do we know who would classify as Christian kids, but they're nightmares at school, at home, and beyond? So I don't disagree with that. I just think it's a bigger kind of thing. Trophy child. Our job as parents is to raise children who love Jesus and leave home as responsible adults. I love that. We prepare them for a lifetime of following Christ, working hard, being married, and raising a family. Now, what I got from a lot of parents is the statement to raise happy kids. And my reaction to that would be is, no, I disagree with that. This idea of raising happy kids, what if they're not happy right now? Did you then not do your job as a parent? Now, I read a book, Trophy Child. As a side note, every single book I give you tonight, if you go back up in the chat and find, it's called the Amazon.com, I think it's shop, and then Brett Ullman, every book on every category I speak on is linked there for you. But Ted says this, they will not be with me forever, so I prepare them accordingly. There's weight to that quote, especially for a parent of a 19 and a 17-year-old, right? There is weight to this. And so as a Christian, I kind of looked at what the Bible says about parenting. And sometimes people get angry when I put up this quote. But the reality is, if you've sought spiritual guidance in parenting, you might have been surprised to discover how little instruction God gives us in this regard. Now, before someone gets angry at this, the word parenting is 100 years old. Parenting as a verb is 100 years old. Teenagers is only from the 1950s moving forward. Adolescence was never a thing hundreds of years ago. Now, I would say, if you become, the Bible calls us to be certain people. If you become who the Bible calls us to be, I think you will be a good parent. And the Bible has a number of, I see this is shifted up a bit, a number of verses that talk about children, like Deuteronomy, teach them to your children. Now, the actual Hebrew word is actually the word inscribe. Proverbs 22:6 was in almost every book I saw. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Here's the problem. Proverbs are not promises. Proverbs are what we call wisdom, adages. So for the most part, good parents have good kids. But the truth is, I know parents who are atrocious, who have wonderful kids, and I know amazing parents who have bad kids. And I think this verse sometimes, we'd look on someone and say, well, I guess your kid, you didn't train them up in the right way, and it might not be true. Colossians and Exodus, very authoritarian, and we'll quickly hit whoever spares the rod when we deal with discipline later. There are parenting stages that are important to understand. This is Galinsky's parenting stages across the top. If you've ever taken a psychology class, you might have gone through that. I don't really understand that. I like the ones on the bottom. There's a pastor in the United States named Andy Stanley. You might have heard. He's at a massive church. His wife actually wrote these. Discipline years 0 to 6, training years 7 to 12, coaching 13 to 17, and friendship 18 plus. Now, don't get hung up on words. You discipline throughout, you train throughout, you're a coach throughout, and you're a friend throughout. These are things of like, you're not a friend, you're a parent, like you're all of these things all put together in one. And every stage is complete in and of itself. So if you have I saw some people have like a 2-year-old and a 12-year-old, like they're not an incomplete next stage. And every kid goes through these things different. If you have a child in rep anything, sports, gymnastics, dance, the list goes on, they will go through these usually quicker just because of that environment. They don't always, but it's usually what we see. Now, parenting styles is the new conversation of the day. If you spend some time online Googling parenting, you will see this for sure. Now, there's a author and speaker in Toronto named Allison Schaefer. If you don't know her, go to AllisonSchaefer.com. You might have seen her on Global News. She does, what's it called? Parenting Playbook, I think it is. She says that there's a lot less parenting styles than names to describe them. And I kind of agree. By the way, Allison does these, if you follow her on Facebook, these like bi-weekly Facebook Lives. Really great stuff on drinking, discipline, like really, really good content. So before we look at parenting styles, Tim Elmore, one of my favorite authors, says from this decade, the 90s, adults began to believe that our world was less safe than ever and kids needed oversight or direction at all times. And it caused some problems. I wonder if you would agree with me that this is where we sit today as a culture. Kids began feeling entitled to special perks because we said that they're special. 2, kids began to feel unsafe, afraid, and even paranoid because of their parents' behavior. 3, kids began believing that they were fragile and cannot handle adversity. And 4, kids began embracing the narrative that the world is full of evil people who could harm them. Number 3, I say to students when I speak all the time, we can do hard things. We can do hard things. Like, we are not these kind of fragile people who cannot handle things. This is because of parenting styles, and some parenting styles hurt, some parenting styles help. So you want to get, have less of the bad ones and then more of the good ones, because you are not one parenting style. Now, I have a YouTube video on this. I'm not going through all of them. Some of the main ones, the blue and then the stars, the main ones we speak about are blue. Stars are ones you should be. Attachment parenting is not what you probably think. It's not Dr. William Sears from early 1990s. It's not co-sleeping and breastfeeding till kids are 4. Not what we're talking about. This is more authors like Leonard Sachs, Gabor Mate, and Gordon Neufeld, Hold On to Your Kid, Collapse of Parenting by Leonard Sachs. That our kids need to attach to us and then go attach to their peers. And they say the problem today is peer attachment, where kids are looking for unconditional love and acceptance from each other, and they can't give that to each other. So it's why our kids leave, like they need a rich home environment that they can then step off into school, other environments, work, and then kind of come back. And conscious parenting is Tina Bryson and Dr. Dan Siegel. Dr. Dan Siegel is one of my favorite authors. Then they use this term, it's called a secure attachment. If kids feel seen, safe, and soothed, they will feel secure. Again, alliteration I'm not always a fan of, but I kind of agree with that. Helicopter parenting, we hover and then swoop in every time there's something, that our kids might be bothered by. We swoop in and fix it. Bulldozer parenting, we push out of the way all the negative things. Christian spiritual parenting, of course, I want my kids to be faith-based. Other ones here, over-parenting, we're going to come back to. I mean, this is when we over-function, our kids under-function, meaning we do not prepare them for life. Adler in parenting is what Allison Schaefer subscribes to. This is from philosopher Alfred Adler, who died back in 1937. He believed that humans have 2 needs, to belong and to feel secure. I get that. Here's the problem I find with many of these parenting styles. They're kind of like, those 2 things. And other ones might be, children leave home parenting. It's about making sure you have a relationship with your spouse because your kids one day will move out. For me, that's in September, but they come home. We know my kids aren't actually moved out yet. And the bottom 4 here are funny. Inside out is the idea of, like, even though your kids might do bad things sometimes, what's the heart like? Velcro parenting. This is what we see in college and university, where kids cannot separate from their parents. Switchboard, everything goes through mom or dad. Humpty Dumpty is a parenting style I see a lot in the church world. We're so scared our kids will fall off, Humpty Dumpty, fall off and get broken, and will never be able to be put back together again. So anyone confused? You're like, well, just tell me what I'm supposed to be. And it's like, well, here's the reality. There are lots of parenting styles, but there's only 4. This is the main ones. Everything I just said can be plotted on this graph. Support and warmth on one axis, And then control and demand sounds negative. Control and demand is actually, oh, I have a spelling error there. I don't know how that happened. This is more, I ask a lot of my kids. So my wife is in home care management. Some of you might know the CCAC. It's actually called something different now with the LIN. But if she was out doing a home visit and my kids were home and I was going to come and, speak with you tonight, I would say to my kids, I want the dishes done. I want the dog walked. Like I'm going to ask a lot, but I'm going to love a lot as well. You are to be the top right, authoritative parents, loving a lot and asking a lot. Now, authoritative has a word in it, and this is the concern. When I talked at the beginning about the father about a kid who hated him, you need authority. You need influence, which is why we actually need to address that conversation more about, relationship. So don't over-parent. Again, over-functioning, under-functioning. This happens at work, in spousal relationships, and other things as well. And I like this. You don't do life with your kids, not for, but I even split it up more. First, you do life with your kids. When they're really little, you're right there with them. Then you do life, you do it for them and then with them, and then you let your kids do life. I use that. This looks like I'm strangling a kid. It's like think of them riding a bike. You do it for them, like for them, and then you let them do it. Your hands are a bit off, and then you kind of let them ride. It's kind of like that in all aspects of life. So I'm going to break what I'm supposed to do as a speaker. I'm going to give you 4 different books and 4 different slides. And these are all books I really like. Leonard Sachs says that many college faculty and staff report a noticeable fragility amongst today's students. Some describe them as teacups, beautiful but liable to break with the slightest drop. If I drop a plastic cup, it bounces. If I drop a teacup, it just shatters. And then you have the House of Cards. That would be like the Netflix Kevin Spacey series. Like if one card falls, they all do. Today, I often hear people call people snowflakes. Millennials are snowflakes. And I say to people, like, millennials are almost 40, married with children. They're like, well, Generation Z are snowflakes. I'm like, why do we have to bash another generation? I hear students say the word drowning a lot. If one more thing happens, I'm going under, is a very common thing I hear, which is quite scary. In 12 Huge Mistakes, Tim says that over-functioning in parenting simply means doing too much for our children, intervening and removing common struggles that they may experience in their day. When we insulate our kids and remove these normal, common sense consequences from actions, we then fail to help our kids prepare for the world that they will have to go into. There's a wonderful TED Talk, if you've never seen it, by Julie Lythcott-Haims. You can Google it when we're done. She says this, and I mean, what a quote. Why did parenting change? From preparing our kids for life to protecting them from life, which means they're not prepared to live life on their own. She actually talks about young adults today, like college, university students, being not quite fully formed humans. It's a funny line to say, but when I speak and college admissions agents walk up to me, they're like, that's what we deal with today. They say, you wouldn't believe what we have to help students deal with first year, like telling young guys especially, they have to shower because mom or dad have always told them that. And we kind of chuckle at that, but it's like, that's not okay. How are students not prepared, right? We've kind of sheltered them sometimes too much. There is this interesting rhythm in today's society where we speed up children's early development. Negative, sexualized music, maybe violent video games. It was a number of years ago. Anyone else a Marvel fan? I went to see Marvel Endgame with I think Ben was 15 at the time. And the theater was packed with 4, 5, and 6-year-old children. There were 3,500 deaths in this movie. One death. I remember taking my kids to Up. Remember that? The old guy with the balloons that floated up? And in the opening credits, the mom died. Kids can't process death. Like, it's a big deal. But we speed up. We put the news on. Please don't have the news on with your kids. And even us, like, maybe just turn the news off a little bit. It's really, here's everything bad that happened in Toronto or wherever today. But then they get older, and then we put the brakes on them. I mean, I'm invited into churches to talk to young adults about dating. That's a weird thing to have to actually do. The big one we have today is kids getting their licenses. In my day, almost everyone got it basically the day they were 16. Today, our stats are between 60 and 80% of kids. Now, just kind of question, are we putting our fears on our kids? I'm talking to a young girl once, and she said, "Oh, I live in a big city and we drive a van." And I'm like, "Yeah." And then we talked a bit more, and ended up her mom would always say that to her. And then she said, "I actually don't think I'm able to drive a van in a big city." And I'm like, "You're in London, Ontario. Like every city, right? You can learn in Halton, you can learn in Ajax. Kids can learn to drive." As soon as my daughter was, I think she was just turned 15, we were driving one day past our church. It's a big parking lot. And she said, "Hey, one day can I drive?" And I'm like, "Let's go." She drove around the parking lot. Every time we talked about driving, what a great opportunity you have to drive. And the truth is, I talk to teachers in grade 12, and 3/4 of their class don't have their license. So parenting styles, these are big things. And so what I'm going to do at the end of each of these, and this is the biggest by far of the four, I'm going to give you kind of an overview, just so you can go, okay, these are things I got to work on. So the biggest things for parenting styles: authoritative parents, love a lot and ask a lot. Don't overparent. If you have a kid who's probably grade 4 and above, challenge them to tell you if you're overparenting. Like if you're always checking, is their homework done? Right? Are you always making sure, like, give them some of the responsibility for that. Do life with, not for. And the coaching analogy is one we didn't really talk about, but so I coached rep, I coached AA baseball, and I had 10 guys and 1 girl, and me and the other coaches worked hard all winter. But on the first game, they go and play. They walk out onto the diamond, and me and the other coaches sit on our buckets with our hands like looking over at the game. It's the same for you. Your kids, and I get school and things are different online, but if you have a teenager, they might go, my son has a job, 2 jobs. He's a lifeguard and he works somewhere else, but like he's at work right now, and I'll have to deal with bullying and communication with adults and other things. And so I better prepare him, just like I had to prepare my kids to go in the field. Make sure our kids are ready for the things that they go and do, whatever it might be. And if I'm going to give you book suggestions, again, these are all online. Trophy Child and Hold On to Your Kids, I've mentioned. You've seen How to Raise an Adult. Dr. Karen's a teen psychotherapist in Toronto. I read this book when my kids were 9 and 8. This is about 10, 12 years old. It is fantastic. And Free Range Kids, you might kind of think is a funny name. It's like free range chickens. There was a case in Winnipeg, Manitoba. A woman called Children's Aid, like Child Protective Services, because a grade 6 kid rode his bike home from school alone. Right? Fear. We're living in a fear-based society. The problem with today's society is we live in a 24/7 news cycle. If something happens in halfway around the world, we hear about it and we assume that's going to happen to our kids. So just some thoughts on the ideas of parenting. You're going to need to look at this and think about it. Number 2 is the greatest gift is time. I think the greatest gift we can give our kid is time. You could argue failure, and we could say it's our faith. I get that. But from a parenting standpoint, time is a really big thing. If you've never heard the marbles analogy, this is, I think, based off of Psalm 90, verse 12, which says, "Teach us to number our days, that we might get a heart of wisdom." Yes, you have your kids forever, but you have a finite amount of time to parent in the way we're talking about right now. And so let's just explain what I mean by that. The day you have a child, you have 936 weeks until they graduate grade 12. Now, let's flip this into 936 marbles in a jar. If every Sunday or Saturday you take 1 marble out and you acknowledge the passing of time, you do not have that week again to, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go get a Blizzard at whatever, Dairy Queen? Can you help me with my homework? Do you want to watch a movie? That is fleeting. And I don't have 52 and 1. My next year, both my kids' birthdays will be held when they're at university. I don't know if we'll be able to see them. I don't know when their exams are. There's something actually called the 18th summer. It's kind of that summer after 18 years. And again, this is just showing you that you should care about, like, birthdays, Christmas, summers. When someone says, "Do you want to go do something?" It matters. It matters. Now, what I see in this moment is, and I mean, I can't see it because I don't have cameras, but what I see is people's shoulders droop. I've actually had people burst out in tears because we grieve. We grieve, and here's what's interesting. When our kids go to college, university, there's a success in them heading out. I'm not saying heading to Ryerson or York or U of T or UIT near me. Actually, it's not called UIT anymore. Ontario Tech or whatever it is. But here's the point. After the young adult years, when your marbles are done, you are still a parent. You're still a parent. My parents in their late 70s, they still pray for me for every talk I do. They still invest in the life of me and my wife and my children. So what the marbles analogy jar with a twist is this. When the marbles are gone, so like kind of like if you have a grade 12, right around now, when like, the birthdays, I mean, it depends, unless they have a birthday like, June 21st and the marbles run out. But if your marbles, you still have some left, dump it out. And then every time you do anything to build into your kid, every time you support, encourage, mentor, FaceTime, take out for dinner in time, they get engaged, then you have grandkids and you babysit, or you take your kids to the zoo or on vacation. Every time you do that, you add a marble back into the jar. I love that. Marbles analogy with a twist. Time matters though. I'm an early bird, so mornings were always kind of me. My kids would get up. I'd make sure they're kind of in a good headspace and ready to take on the day. Drive time matters, and this is just a YouTube video. If your kids ever say, hey, can you drive me somewhere? Like as we start to be able to do more things, say yes. Have you ever been in a car with like 6 14-year-olds and they're talking and you're like, do they realize that I'm right here? Like they talk like you're just invisible. But if it's just even you and your kids, there's something about, for me, when I was driving to a coaching event or going to a movie or somewhere, and just looking forward, the rich conversations you have, and meals, there's something about meals. Columbia University says if you have 3 dinners a week together as a family, all the bad things, teen pregnancy, drug use, dropping out of school, all of these things go way, way down. Now, this isn't just eating. It's not just shoving foods in our mouth, right? This is maybe the cooking, the preparing, the serving, asking questions. One thing we do in our family is rose, bud, thorn. Tell me something good that happened today. Tell me something, bud, you're looking forward to in the future. And thorn, what kind of sucked today? And me and my wife are part of this conversation. And it's an important thing just to have, to walk through the table and learn about each other. Phones are off. They are not in your pocket buzzing. And bedtime matters for all stages. I say except teenagers. If you're tucking in a 15-year-old, I'm going to propose you might be overparenting, but you get what I mean by that. So some thoughts with time. The marbles analogy, you can physically make this. You can put it with M&M peanuts if there's no allergies. You can do pennies, whatever you like. The marbles physical analogy, though, I also am going to give you an app at the end of the night. It's called the Parent Queue if you want to search it up now, QUE. And as you sign in, it actually does the marbles analogy for all of your kids for you. Meals matter. Scheduling matters more when you kind of have that high school age. When your kids are young, they're with you all the time. Suddenly, my kids are both lifeguards. They're at 2 different pools. They're like Monday, Tuesday, one's gone, Thursday, Friday, the other's like, we're not having family dinners anymore, but we're doing a family night, and we have to sit down and plan it out. And the rocks analogy, this is a really important one, and I use this almost from my media conversation. If you have looks like a iced coffee jar, but if you have this is just a glass, but if you put big rocks and then medium rocks and then the sand, everything fits. If you put the sand first and then the big rocks last, they don't. This is just making sure your kids do the things and you that matter, right? Like healthy eating, exercise, good sleeps, doing your homework, faith, family, friends, these kinds of conversations. And I have a few book suggestions. Grown Up's Guide to Teenage Humans is a wonderful, wonderful, funny name, but wonderful book. Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And Fair Play is about it was not probably my favorite book I read in 2020 by Eve Rodsky. It is about the mental, emotional load, predominantly of women in our relationships and how that needs to change. And this needs to be addressed in our relationships so that we can then model better things for our kids. Now, I don't have the book, but I have the deck of cards you can buy, and these are literally cards that you and spouse would kind of divide up. And I know I generalize, but the reality is that from some of our perspectives as men, we need to take some of the emotional labor. Now, someone might be saying, I don't know what you're talking about. A few months ago, I come downstairs and my wife says to me, your dad's birthday as today, the card's on the table, sign it, and we're seeing him later. I have no idea it's his birthday. I did not get a card, and I did not book a time to go see my dad. That's emotional labor. That someone else has to think on that and I don't. And so this is important to think through as spouses so that we then can change and maybe get our kids involved. Maybe just, for cleaning your kid's bathroom, you give them that card, that's theirs. Or cooking on Wednesday, your daughter, son, that's their day to do it. So I would just say time is a big conversation. Think on time. Think on how you can be better at this. Number 3 is communication tonight. And this is like, now we're parenting with the right styles. Now we're actually spending time with our kids. But how are we communicating with our kids? Do our kids think that we only love them when they get good grades or they follow our rules? Do they know that we love them, quote unquote, forever and always? There's a book by Gary Chapman and Jennifer Thomas. This idea of if there's fracture in your relationship. Number 1 is just saying, I'm sorry. And it's okay to go to your kid and say, for me, it might be, I had a really bad night's sleep tonight. I'm sorry how I spoke this morning. I should have done that. But if that doesn't fix things, maybe you need to spend more time or have better communication. Every one of your kids and you get along differently. My son and I were sports people. I coached everything he ever did. My daughter was a dancer and a gymnast. I was threatened to coach her dancing. It's a joke you can say once. But my daughter and I, we have a TV show we watch on Netflix, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. That was ours. And now we have other ones we watch. And then we love iced coffee. We love chicken shawarma. There's things that we do together. And then maybe counseling. I would encourage you to normalize counseling in your home, meaning that counseling is not just for people who are unwell or broken, as we might say. Counseling is great for couples looking at how to be better in their marriage. It's great for parents looking at being better parents, or just, we've said to our kids, if you just want to go talk to someone, whether it's peer pressure, the future, just another set of eyeballs, I'd say, on my kids. But you might go to a counselor and say, hey, my relationship's really fractured. How could I improve this? I would also ask, are we actually listening to our kids? I'm speaking at a church environment, and I finished speaking, and a young girl came down to me. She's 15, and she burst into tears, and she's like, my dad, I keep telling my dad I'm struggling with mental health. She's shaking, almost at a panic attack. And then in that moment, I forget what church I speak all through kind of different Christian faith churches. I think it was a Pentecostal church. Pastor walks up and he says, oh, I see you met my daughter. And I had a chance to sit them down and kind of bridge this conversation. But if our kid says, I'm struggling with X, I'm struggling with self-harm, alcohol, eating disorders, depression, whatever it might be, our response is, I love you. Let's sit down. Let's walk through this together. I think sometimes in our Christian world, do you remember the band REM from the mid-1990s? They have the song Shiny Happy People. I think sometimes it's like, well, we know Jesus, so everything's great. Like, no, it's not. We might be Christians, but we still live in the real world. There's still brokenness and pain and other things that happen. But if your kid says, I'm struggling, like that means they're struggling. I forget who was it that talked about the deafening silence. It might have been Martin Luther King Jr., but he actually says, he talks about there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Listen to your kids and to each other, right? As friends and spouses. And never forget you're being watched. I did a service once in a church, I forget what it was, on pornography. And I got home, so I'm driving home, and I'm in a Subway restaurant, and my phone dings. I look, and this 18-year-old says, hey, if I ever struggle with porn, can I talk to you? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, why wouldn't you talk to your dad? Like, I know your dad. And he said, well, after the event, we got into my car, and the first thing my dad said is, what kind of stupid people get addicted to pornography? And this 18-year-old, kids are smart. He said, Brett, my dad got in the car and said that. And in that moment, my dad told me he's not a safe person to talk to about anything ever again. Your influence, right? That authority, it's just, first off, where's the grace and the mercy in our church world for someone dealing with addiction, whether it be like pornography or sex or alcohol or drugs? I mean, it's the same when a young girl in your school or in your church or in an environment gets pregnant at 15. How do you respond? Because how you respond is how your daughter or your son will respond to you when something happens to them. I've always said to my kids, I love you forever and always. And I know it's a Robert Munch kind of cliche, but like I told my daughter in grade 9, if you ever get pregnant, she's like, Dad, I'm like, listen, if you ever do, you can come and talk to me. Like, there's no one other than your mom and me who have your best interest the most. Like I say to my kids always, I'm for you, I'm not against you. I'm for you, I'm not against you. It's a powerful thing to say to kids. And although we really love our kids, sometimes we don't know how to convey that love. Do you know how many fathers or daughters tell me that their fathers have never told them that they love them? And I don't hear that from sons because often guys don't talk about that, but it would be the same. And I always say, if you want to just text your kids right now, whoever's on the call tonight, just I love you, you're more than welcome to. And if they write you back, are you dying? You know, you might not maybe have said it enough. If you've never read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, this is for teenagers. There's one for teen children, but the one for adults. It's for spouses, but this is for anyone. It's the idea that we all receive love differently. And how, like, my father and I don't like cards. And so we've always usually done a tube of Pringles. If you're going to spend $3 at Shoppers Drug Mart on a card, buy me a $3 tube of Pringles, and we sign it and give it back and forth. My wife loves cards. So it's learning what are your kids' love languages. And I think it's a really, really great thing to understand. Communication, we've kind of been going through this, and so listening is really important. If you, like, this is a webinar, kind of a different environment. Let's say you're just working later and your kid comes in and you're on your phone. You don't look and just say, what do you need, right? Or you don't turn, my door's right here. You don't just turn. This is what you do now. You take your phone, you put it down, and you turn and you give full attention. Our problem today is partial attention. We're sort of listening. We're sort of doing something else. We're multitasking, and give our kids full attention. Driving, love languages. I do have a YouTube video on the idea of a family meeting. This is the best if you have young kids, but I would do it with any kid who's still in your house. Every August, we have a family meeting. We sit down. There are no unwritten rules in our house. We're a Christian home. What does that mean? My kids, go to a certain camp, so when do they want to go when they're younger? Do you going to play sport this year? Do you going to play soccer, basketball? Do you need new shoes? Do you need a new ball? Are we going to go on a vacation? Remember vacations? Where are we going to go? Like, it's not like you can go anywhere in the world, but it was like, okay, here's some cheap places we can go. And then we go out for a meal, but it was just a rich time where we were kind of together as a family. And a few books, Hold On to Your Kids is wonderful. We've talked about those two. He's Not Lazy by Adam Prince was just fantastic. Oh, there's one I just read for women, Untangled. It's actually on that Amazon thing. It's called Untangled, really great. And there's When Sorry's Not Enough, and then there's the 2 for children and teenagers. If you have young kids especially, what you can do is kind of love on your kid in one of the ways for a week and see how they respond. Now, everyone loves all of these in some way, sort of, but it's just interesting to see if you can figure it out. Again, lots of things in this conversation around the idea of time. Now, discipline, I think we get wrong. Ron Morris, I don't know how many of you are educators on this call, but if you are, Ron traveled to school boards for years throughout Ontario. Discipline is about teaching children to behave properly, not punishing them for behaving badly. Let that sink in for a second. This is a huge change. It's not about punishment, it's about teaching. Teaching our kids how to behave, how to live, how to work, how to interact, how to play. So I don't have time to go through all things of discipline. I'm going to go through 3. The first is you need a relationship for influence. Now, this is a curriculum called the Orange Curriculum. Some churches use this. Now, across the top is how many hours a day you have to spend with your kids. Kind of like high school kids, you only have a few, and you have a lot when they're younger. But look at the 2 kind of gray balls with orange writing. When you have a baby, you have 100% positional influence. Like, if we were physically together tonight and you're like, I don't like this guy, you would pick up your baby and you leave. Positional influence goes down. Relational influence starts at nothing and it grows up. What you want is relational influence. You want a relationship with your kid. This is the thing that gives you, as that kind of ball says there, freedom. And I think it's a really great idea. So build your relationship. Now, some of you will say, I have a 15-year-old, we don't have a great relationship. No matter where you're at, we look at getting better. And some of you have a great relationship. Some of you have a good relationship. There's a book called Good to Great, right? No matter what it is, we're moving forward. Number 2 is clear, agreed on expectations and consequences. I think it's a really interesting statement. So this is Karen Gordon. She has these 3 types of boundaries of how we parent. The first is stone wall boundaries, right? We're the parent, you're the kid, you obey me. That's very authoritarian, which, as we said before, is not the right parenting style. Wild field boundaries. Rules are unclear and vague. I'm at a talk, when was it? It was pre-COVID, so like before March 2020. And a father comes up after and he says, hey, so what are your views on grounding? I grounded my kid today. And I'm like, why? And he said, oh, because of curfew. I'm like, okay, grounding's a great conversation. Curfew is a big conversation for kids. And I said, oh, what's his curfew? And he said, oh, he doesn't have one. I said, sorry, but you grounded him because he was late for curfew. Yes. So what's his curfew? He doesn't have one. I said, I'm confused. And the father said, he should know when to be in. What on earth does that mean? I'm a grown adult and I have no clue what you're talking about. How is a 15-year-old supposed to understand this? Rules are unclear and vague, and then you expect a kid to actually come home. What we're to be, picket fence boundaries. Rules are clear, they're flexible, and they're negotiated, right? Negotiated with your kid. It was the summer of I'm going to say grade 8, and my son, so he's going to grade 9. He said, hey, can I stay out? I forget if it was 10 or 11. I think it was 10 o'clock. It's a perfect August night. We're like, okay. 10 after 10, he comes in, and I don't know what it is with us with adults. I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, you're late. And he said, oh, no, I'm late. Let me tell you why. So him and his friends, he actually used the word dispersed. I think it was great. So he says, we dispersed, and we're coming home. And then it was just him and a girl left. And she said, hey, it's really dark. Do you mind walking me home? And my son, Ben, says to me, I knew if I walked her home, I'd be late. But he said, I knew that'd be okay. And honestly, I almost cried because I was ready to tear into him for being late. Can you think of the influence that would have been lost if I get mad and tear into my son for doing what? Something that's good. Rules are clear, flexible, and negotiated. This is a really interesting line. Some parents fail to realize that it's the job of every child to tear down their parents' fences and build their own. Like, just think through that one for a second. I want my kids to, like, from a faith standpoint, I want them to love Jesus, not because I do, but because they do. I want them to go to church and value the things that we do in our churches because they want to do that, not because I'm forcing them to do that. I want them to come home in good time because they want a good night's sleep. Do you know what my wife and I began kind of late grade 10, early grade 11? We stopped curfews. So my kids would say, what time do you want to be home tonight? And we would say, what time do you want to be home? But my wife and I had already negotiated. Whatever they say is fine. Here's the reality. We want them, before they head off to college, university, apprenticeships, workplace, but before they head off after grade 12, we wanted them to learn. Now, some parent will always say, like, nothing good happens after grade 10. And I'm like, wow, we're old when we say that. Like, the truth is, I go to bed at 10. I'm kind of asleep by 10:30. My kids go out at 10 o'clock. This idea that, well, they're all just drinking and having sex. It's like, well, that happens at 4 in the afternoon as well. It's like, we forget what it's like to just hang out, just to play video games and walk on a beach or talk just, in Tim Hortons or Starbucks for hours. And so we just would say, whatever time you want to be home. I remember once my daughter said 2:30, and there was a reason for it. One of her friends was flying home and they wanted to hang out with her for a few minutes. And the next morning she said, wow, I'm tired. I need to make sure I go to bed earlier tonight. I'm like, wow, there's some good learning in that. But I really love this kind of sentence. We need to teach our kids, right? That they'll learn and then they'll make their own fences. So relationship, agreed on expectations, and punishment versus training. Now, I'm not going to go through a huge thing here. I will just say I really agree with Ron Morrish that, are you going to punish kids and give them consequences, or give them training and for what they need for success? Now, I have a full YouTube video on spanking. The majority of you here have older kids, and I'm assuming you're not spanking older kids. I would land in the non-spanking category. Let me give you just very quickly why I stand here. Number one, people from faith-based use Proverbs 13:24, thinking the Bible says it. That's the verse, he who spares the rod hates his son. But the rod is about the rod of discipline. It's not like a physical rod that you'd hit somebody with. So if the Bible doesn't say it, then the question would be, is it successful? 1,000 pediatricians wrote a statement saying it may work in the moment, but it hurts your relationship overall. So if it it's not biblical and it's not working, maybe we find different things. Don't forget, children's controls when they're young, they're easily fragile by fatigue, hunger, frustration, other things. And here's one of the most interesting things about spanking. Research says that whether a child gets a punitive spanking or not is hardly ever determined by the child's behavior. It is almost always determined by how the adult's day went. And that's why kids don't get spankings at 8 in the morning. They get them at 8 at night. When an adult who is tired, frustrated, and exasperated starts to hit a child, it should not be about us. Now, spanking is a amazingly, I find, controversial conversation. Please don't get upset at what I'm saying here and lose everything else. If your kids have been spanked, they're not forever damaged. I was spanked. I'm not forever damaged. I didn't spank my kids. My wife spanked my daughter a few times. We're looking at best practices, right? So if we need to say, I'm going to do something different, we look at moving forward, but we don't spend all our time looking back. So main thoughts on discipline. It's about teaching. Like this is something I actually did 2 years when my kids were younger, where every day I tweeted one thing I was teaching them: how to make scrambled eggs, how to change snow tires, how to change a light bulb. My kids remember nothing about the days or the things that I was doing, but they remember the practical things of learning. Influence. How can you have better influence with your kids? And for some of us, it might just mean saying, hey, do you want to go for dinner? You want to go to patio? We can do patios now. Do you want to go get a burger? Do you want to go sit at Kelsey's or something else? Picket fence boundaries is a really interesting idea. And punishment versus training. And so it's going to be training, right? Let's try to get away from punishment and look at teaching. If you have look at the book, The Explosive Child by Ross Greene, one of my favorite books. A new approach for understanding and parenting easily frustrated, chronically inflexible children. He talks a lot about this idea that kids they don't know how to be a certain way. So brother and sister are fighting, brother and brother are fighting, whatever. Teach them how to get along, right? When you see them getting along, acknowledge those kinds of things. When a kid comes up and they've been talking with their friends, like maybe you get a 15, 16-year-old son or daughter, and they come in and they speak to you like how they're talking to their friends, as opposed to yelling at them. How about you just say this? I'm going to let you say that one again. Why don't you speak to me, right, as a parent and someone who loves you, as opposed to one of your friends? Like, say it with respect, and your kid will almost always go, I'm really sorry, and they're going to say it a different way, right? Let's work together at teaching them. Secrets of Discipline. The cover looks horrible. It's a wonderful book. Honey, I Wrecked the Kids is Allison Schaefer. A Parent on Purpose, Amy Carney, another wonderful book. And the two little ones, Grace-Based Discipline. And the bottom right is Boundaries with Kids. If you ever read anything by John Townsend and Henry Cloud, some of my favorite authors ever. So what I want to do for the last little bit, because this is kind of like, those are things that I think are foundational. But from that, we then need to go and address things. We need to address mental health, right? We need to look at media with our kids. How much time are we spending online looking at these kinds of conversations? So I'm going to really quickly go over 3 things. One thing that parents often talk about is the idea of family discipleship. Like, how do we kind of bring faith into our home? And I love this idea that our worldview shapes our values and our values shape our actions. So if your kids are having an issue, maybe we need to get them a biblical Christian worldview. And I have an older book on that and my new book, which I'll go through later. And Sticky Faith is an interesting book. It talks about the idea of our kids who've grown up going to Catholic schools, right? Going to church, and how many of them walk away from faith. And one of the markers for kids who stay in the faith is actually summer camp. Kids who go to like faith-based sleepover summer camp. And I don't know if we're going to have that this summer, but those are one of those markers. And so I just say family discipleship. I agree. There's some great books I have online for you. Now, this would be the number one thing parents talk to me about: media. Now, let me just give you an example. One of my conversations. Father says to me during COVID, this was last summer, he said, so my kid played 3 hours of Fortnite last night. I'm furious. And I said, what'd you do yesterday? I don't even know why I asked that. And he goes, oh, I watched the Blue Jays game. I'm like, wasn't the Yankees-Jays game like 16 or 17 innings? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, how long was that? The father, like, we're on Zoom, he pauses, doesn't know what to say. It's like, you don't value Fortnite, but you value Blue Jays. So, right, I value basketball. I value watching an NFL game. But if my kid plays video games, which is actually interactive in some sort, we did kind of. So anyways, my point is make sure we're being consistent with what we're doing. Now, the one thing I say here is in grade 4, when it says solution, my wife and I switched from my kids coming home and saying, hey, can I have this song by this artist? And we would say, well, who do you want? So I remember one of the first songs Zoe wanted was Rihanna. I think it was the song Umbrella. Do you remember that from a lifetime ago? And so as opposed to Googling it, she's a little kid and what are the lyrics? We would say, here's the computer. Here's how to open up a browser. Here's how to type in the name, like Rihanna plus lyrics plus Umbrella, and then read through them. We're going through a song one day and my daughter says, what's that word? And I'm like, it's a slang term for a woman's breast. And she's like, ooh. And I'm like, do you want this song? And she's like, no. Did you hear that though? She said no. And this is where we began to teach our kids discernment, right? There's a disconnect between what we say we are as faith-based people and what we listen to, even as adults. And there's some other great websites and things here. I'm going to go over those in a minute. It even looks different. This is from my media faith culture talk. I threw a few of these in because I think they're really important. This is how students tell me their parents speak to them. And this is how I think we need to have a better narrative. Are you on Snapchat again? It's stupid. I'm 50. I don't use Snapchat. Now I have an account. I like once in a while to make those weird, like your tongue comes out, weird eyeballs or whatever. But if your kids value Snapchat, don't call it dumb. Right? Well, why make fun of something that they enjoy? Telling your kids to grow up, hundreds of students told me this is what their parents tell them. Anyone a gardener? Did anyone plant back on the May 2-4 weekend and you've left your plants? Like you have to till the soil, take the weeds out, miracle grow, water. You don't tell kids to grow up. You teach them how to grow up. Now let's go to the right side, the new narrative. When we're talking about technology and spending too much time online, if you just say get off, you're spending too much time online, no conversation. How about talking about the growth of mental health in the last 14 to 15 years? Now, it is not all due to technology. Our diets are bad, we sleep less, we're more stressed, there's so many things, there's so much pressure on kids. But they do say if you spend over 3 hours a day on social media, you have a greater chance of being depressed. Now, there's nuance to everything. I would also say maybe people who are depressed spend 3 hours a day online. But begin a conversation about that, and kids will have a good conversation. Bullying, we talk about fear of missing out. I spoke to 1,000 students it was one of the W's, Western Waterloo, Windsor, and I said to them, hey, how many of you feel less than after being on Instagram? Everyone. And so it's looking at how do we have a better relationship with our phone? Isolation and loneliness, which has become a really big deal during COVID. And this idea too, that we're not in this alone, tell your kids, you're not in this alone. I'm an adult and I struggle with technology. I have to be very cognizant. If I'm talking to you face to face and my Apple Watch starts tapping me, I'm getting a phone call. I refuse to look at it. If I'm talking to someone, full attention to that person. I do have a whole series of how to have a better relationship with your phone on YouTube. If you haven't seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, I would encourage you to. It's a little fear-based, but I would say we need to look at having a better relationship. And this is the one, which one is students? Number 5. If you take your phone and prop it up against your computer and do your homework that way and everything's dinging, it will take you 3 hours to do 45 minutes of schoolwork. When I say that to an audience of 1,000 students at a school, everyone's attention's what? We can do things better. Touch and interaction. We touch our phones 2,500 times a day. Let's do it less. We interact with our phone. We open it up 150 times a day. We can do it less. And parents asked me during the pandemic, how much time per day? And first off, I just say grace and mercy, especially if you have young kids. We've just been home way too much. But the rocks analogy I said before is what you should teach your kids. It's not about how much time you spend. If you've had a long day and you watch TV all night, that's okay sometimes, right? We're exhausted, but do the things you need to do. And then whatever you do with the rest of your time, whether it's just hanging with a friend, you're on TikTok, and we can chat about all those things later, but discernment and things like that are important. But this is a really good at the rocks analogy. And then what you do with your time after, I don't care. If my kids are doing well in school, friend time, they're involved with church, they, are getting exercise and doing different things, that's okay. I've never had a number in my house. Now, mental health, again, this is my journey, and I'm going to give you one slide. Now, I have a talk called Hope for the Walking Wounded you can find on YouTube. This, I think, especially in the church world, we over-spiritualize mental health. And mental health is a complex conversation. There are all kinds of ways we come into it. One of the things is overparenting, right? When kids head to college, university, and they are ill-prepared because of our overparenting, there's incredible anxiety that comes. But there's trauma, right? There's burnout and breakdown. There's chronic unwellness, all these reasons we come into it. And it's also a lot of ways we come out of it. And so I would just say body, mind, and soul. I love this. Your issue might be physical. Go see a doctor. Get blood work taken. Is there anything wrong with your vitamin D, your thyroid? I'd say eat better, exercise daily, even if it's just going for a walk. There's something about being outside, and sleep more and sleep better. Your issue might be emotional. Go see a counselor, a registered trained counselor, someone who can help you walk through these things. I actually just went back to school for this so that within about 2 years, I'll actually be able to do therapy. Now, I do not say your issue might be spiritual, because it's unbelievably uncommon that would ever be the answer to your struggle. But our faith is the foundation, right? And God says, you'll have trouble, but I'll be with you in that trouble, which is why your worldview shapes other things. I have 2 books on, well, actually I have 3, 2 on mental health. Your Story, The Wounding Embrace. I wrote with a friend of mine and a psychologist, but this was written before my breakdown. So it's good information, but it's not like Body, Mind, and Soul. And I wrote a book called Reset. This is my breakdown put in book form. Someone just said to me, I've never heard a Christian's perspective on a breakdown. So it's actually $1 on Amazon, but you can just search it on my website. I think if you sign up for my blog, it's just a free digital download. It comes to you. But it is my story, and then 18 friends and family wrote their stories. Actually, I do have to, while I have you, 3 books I would suggest on mental health. Anxiety and Phobia Workbook, and you'll find all of these on the Amazon page. Can you see how, this is a massive book. What I love is chapter on nutrition. Do you realize nutrition, food is medicine, right? If you're eating aspartame actually makes anxiety, it actually makes it grow. How can you maybe not, eat? How could you eat better? Sleep more. What is good sleep hygiene? What if you have to be on meds, right? This book is just phenomenal. There's a great book if your teenager has anxiety. It's called Anxiety Workbook for Teens. It's thinner, and there's lots of little things you fill out inside it. Again, this is on my list, and I think everyone should read this. The Ripple Effect. Hopefully that's flipped around when you see it. Sleep better, eat better, move better, think better. I paid my kids to read this. In grade 11, my wife and I, John Maxwell, some of you might know that name. He's a guru for leadership, and he used to pay his kids to read certain books. We paid $20 for that book. I think the learning is so good that we were willing to pay it. All right, some resources, and we're going to be done. If you want to keep current with culture and other things, these are some great sites. The Parent Cue is the app I mentioned at the beginning that does the marbles analogy. It's also a blog and podcast. Growing Leaders is Tim Elmore. We mentioned him a little bit. CPIU stands for the Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. This is a website. If you get their weekly email blast, just sign up. It's all free. It will just say, here's the top things searched on Twitter, top things on YouTube. Here's articles on new drugs, new terms, or other things. Plugged In is kind of like movie reviews. And Axis is a really interesting player in this field. They do this weekly what do they call it? Teen Culture Translator, translating teen speak to adult speak. So I'm writing my new book, and I'm doing a thing on drugs and alcohol. So I say to my kids, so no one smokes, right? And they're like, they both look at me, they're like, almost everyone smokes. I'm like, no one's, and my daughter's like, wait, what do you think smoking is? My daughter says, I'm like, this is what I do for a living. And she's like, what do you think smoking is? And I'm like, cigarettes. And she says, oh, we're talking about weed. I'm like, wow. She says, no one smokes cigarettes. It's very, very rare. Language is important. By the way, if you're talking to your kid and what you can do is rephrase what I hear you saying and say it back to them, and they might say no, and then keep doing that till we're actually on the same kind of page. But these are some great things. My website is just my name. It's brettallman.com. And I'm not a normal blogger. I am a curator. I read ferociously, and I post the best things that I can find. One of my things that I've done to combat the social dilemma movie is that I follow people. So like I mentioned a whole bunch of authors today. If I'm reading an author and I love them, I Google their name, I go to their website, and I'm like Twitter, like LinkedIn, like Instagram, follow. Because when I finish this tonight and we're done, I'll go downstairs, I'll probably grab my iPad, and I will probably head on social media. I don't just want dinner and dogs. Now I have an English bulldog. I do like pictures of English bulldogs, but I want rich content on my faith, on, for me, health, being a 50-year-old man. I want to know, how to do better with my conversations on parenting and all these other things. And so follow all those people. All my socials at the top, but I have 1,100 blogs and articles all on content. If you click blog, mental health, leadership, parenting, all these other things. My YouTube channel, sorry, that's cut off right there, but it's on the list if you go up high. I have about 200 videos, and I would encourage you, subscribe to people's channels, because when you do that, the algorithm will start sending you the content that, if you do a whole bunch of parenting things, great parenting stuff will be shown on your wall to you every day. And I have, there's the how to have a better relationship with your phone. There's lots of great stuff. Now, this is called an Amazon influencer page. I do not like this, but when I hit 5,000 followers on YouTube, I was able to do this. And here's what I love. Every book that I suggest on every category, I can put in one list. And they're all divided by category titles, by subject titles. And I just love that everything can be in one place for you. Now, I've asked thousands of parents after this presentation, how do you feel? And the word is overwhelming. Like, I'm overwhelmed by everything that you said. And so I want to help you decrease it 3 ways. YouTube channel, right? You can go and find good learning, my website. And the third is my new parenting book. Now, this was a long journey. It is a 3-year journey to create this. And this is not a normal book. I don't know if you can grasp the size. It is 226,000 words. So my biggest book ever was 38,000. It is 6 books in one. And I was going to hold it up, but you can just look on the bottom there. The first 6 chapters are parenting, what we talked about tonight. I break it out a bit more, like progression of parenting. Then there's a chapter on family discipleship, bringing faith into the home. But the last chapters, all the last 9, I actually flipped how I wrote them. So I wrote them for anyone, meaning let's say you have a 15-year-old and they're struggling with anxiety, they could read this chapter. There's parenting tips, but it's written to anyone. Mental health, engage in the world, media, sexuality, dating, finances and education, substance abuse, and then loneliness. And so you can find this on my website, on Amazon, everywhere else. If you ever do buy it on Amazon, a review is really, really helpful for me. This is just ways you can support me. You probably know that. If you ever do want to make a donation, go to the bottom of brettallman.com and you'll find it. 2 slides, and we're done. Where do you start? It was just the week in March when COVID shut everything down. I had a chance to see a band in Toronto called For King and Country, and they have a song called Burn the Ships. And the analogy is when settlers came over, they would burn their wooden ships to the ground so they wouldn't go home. But the line says, burn the ships and don't look back. Please don't look tonight and go, oh, look at all the things I did wrong. We've all done things wrong, myself included, in our parenting. Look at how you can get better, right? What are those things you can do to get better? John Maxwell, the leadership guru, says that whenever you're challenged by anyone on anything, choose one thing. So tonight, what is one thing I said? What is one thing I said and you're like, I can do that. Maybe it's family meeting. You're like, I could do that. Or you're like, family dinners. Oh, I could do 3 days. No matter what it is, he says, choose that one thing. But here's the big one. He says, you have 3 days to do something about it. It is Monday night, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Thursday evening, if you haven't made a single move forward on any of this stuff that we're talking about tonight, then he says statistically you won't. And the goal is to be kind of a catalyst tonight, right? To push you forward into, being better parents, no matter what age and stage of your kids that they're at. So I encourage you, as parents, support each other in your schools. There'll be different schools in your families, in your churches. I know some churches that do, weekly events for parents, kind of helping. They're often called weird names, chew and chat, lunch and learns, like just going through different curriculum or different things to help. I want to leave you with the quote from that book called Trophy Child. It says, they will not be with me forever, so I prepare them accordingly. And I would just challenge you, so go prepare your kids accordingly. We are done kind of our presentation conversation. If there's any questions you have quickly, drop them in the chat. I don't see any right now. Now, I'll let you know how usually it goes. Most people write me privately because most are more personal questions. They're children. What's funny is I still get a lot about mental health because that's my journey as well. But without any questions, you guys can, I don't know how they're going to do it, but I know they've recorded this. And so you'll be able to go through this again if you want to. If you have any questions, you can let me know. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And it's 8:12. Go enjoy the rest of the evening. And hopefully I'll see you again soon. All right. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So helpful.
Thanks, everybody. It's always the Zoom thing where everyone kind of slowly dissipates. All right, I'm going to log off too. Night, everybody.
Brett,
Yes.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Fantastic. I'm glad that we have it recorded and many parents will be able to enjoy it. So thank you so much. It was fantastic. My children are finished university now. So
Okay.
22, 25, I'm one of the superintendents. And you know what, even as a parent with a little bit older children, so many good lessons. And I love that the job of every child is to tear down their parents' fence and build their own. And I love that. And good for you. It's awesome.
Thank
Great
you.
work.
If you ever want to do another one of these, my mental health talk seems to be one that parents really resonate with as well.
I think what our plan is, because we did our whole parent speaker series through CPIC through June, but we'd like to spread it out next year. So I definitely will take you up on that. And so we can look at these topics for the fall. So thank you so much. It was fantastic. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions beyond this. Okay, so thank you so much. And good luck to your children as what they're doing next year. I was going to just tell you my little tidbit. Mine both graduated Queens. And so my son finished this year from Queens. A year and a half at home, though, because he decided not to go back and do it from home. But fantastic experience. So I'm sure your children will continue to love the university experience.
Our one worry is that Queens is only giving 93% kids residence.
I heard you say that, and I know that from other kids. So my son had been living off campus at this point, and that's what he said. It was tough because it isn't the way Western is. Queens is not like Western in terms of residence and the meal program and all that. So it's a little bit tough. So
yeah, so we're kind of waiting.
He's going to end up where he's meant to be.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good.
Thank you so much. You can sign off, and Andrea and I will finish the recording. And if there's any questions or things that come up, we will be in touch. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Take care. Have a good night. Okay. What we'll do with the recording is the recording will be shared on our CPIC site. And we could have it sent out, but I think we'll share it on the CPIC site so that any parent could go to it and do the recording.